Hi, Harlem. I'm going to leave a bit of space for background noise. And of course, there's none at this precise moment, typical. Okay. Hello, my name's Vicky O'Shea, and this is episode 56 of A Wealthy Life. And we're going to be talking about why women need property portfolios for their financial security. Now, if you're not a woman, before you switch off, it's going to apply to you too. And the reason for this one is really because we're going to start a little mini subsection here around the difference between strategy and technique. And I'll talk about that next week, and how important it is to get your strategy right, to understand why you want to invest in property even before you do anything. And I think that it's quite easy for some people to see why property is important to them. I think it's quite easy for some people to recognize that property is a great way to leverage your cash, your time, your knowledge, in some cases, to leverage the time and knowledge of others in terms of your letting agents and your build team. It is the equivalent of a brick bank. So instead of putting your money into a bank and getting, if you like, passive savings accounts, you have to work a little. And instead of getting a passive return, you're going to get a return by renting the property out. And in order to get that return, you're going to manage a letting agent who's going to manage the tenant. And that's how you're going to get your money. And therefore, you're going to get a better rate of return than you would in the banks. Okay. So why is this extra important for women? And even if you're a man, why should you listen? So let's do, if you're a man listening to this at the moment, why should you listen? Because you'll know women. You'll maybe be married or partnered with one. You might have a sister. You might have a daughter at some point, either now or in the future. You might even have friends that are women. And if you're a woman, then you're a woman. And let me just run you through how, from both personal experience and observation, I see the financial lives of men and women differ, and therefore why this is so important. So first off, only women can actually do the being pregnant and give birth to children. Yes, theoretically, anyone in a relationship can care for them, but one person, and it will have to be one female, will have to do that. And as soon as that female becomes pregnant, her whole career path, her whole earning potential, her income is forever reduced. And let me just explain that little piece there. So if, for example, you're going to do the bare minimum of missing work, and you're fit and you're healthy, and you're going to go right to the end of your pregnancy, almost your due date before you have your child. Well done, amazing to you, and a great choice if you're making it as a choice. Tough if you're being forced in that position financially, but let's assume you're having a great time, you're fit and you're well, and you can go really almost till the last week. And then at that point, any employer-based pregnancy or childbirth benefits will kick in, and hopefully your employer is going to give you some maternity time. Maybe you'll get and be eligible for maternity payments from the government. Fine. But if you were earning, and let's say it's 100 units before you fell pregnant, when you go on to maternity, you might be lucky enough that your employer will keep paying you 100 units for a set period of time. But as soon as that set period of time is up, you're either going to have to go back to work, or you're going to have to accept a drop. And let's say what happens is that you accept a drop and you go from earning 100 units, you go down to earning 75 units. You do this for, let's say, 4 weeks, just because I'm going to make the maths nice. And so at the end of 4 weeks, you are 100 units of income short. You can make that up when you go back to work. But how are you going to make that up if you then go back to work for 100 units a period again? You can't. The only way that you can make that money up is if you get a pay rise. And I don't know if any of you know of a woman who has taken time off work to have a child, to start a family, and then been able to go back to work, to employment, and gone back and benefited from a pay rise or a promotion. It doesn't happen. And therefore, you are always going to be those 100 units or multiple times of 25, whatever your loss is, whatever you lost when your full-time pre-child income dropped, however much that gap was, you will forever be without that amount of money. And then you're going to go, well, no, because once my children get into school, or maybe once my children grow up, or maybe once my children leave home in 18 to 20 years time, I'll be able to make that money up. You won't. You'll never make that money up, because you will always be capped throughout your working life as long as you've got the children, and I'll explain why. And you are never going to be able to work long enough that you can make up 20 years or more, if you have more children, 20 years plus of negative income. Not negative income, but reduced income. Now, the reason that you're not going to be able to make it up and you're not going to get a pay rise and a great job, and of course there are outliers to all of these conversations. You know, maybe you are someone who, subject to their family circumstances, maybe your partner stays at home and you go to work. Well, then their income will have been reduced from what it was before. Or maybe you're in a position where one of your parents or the grandparents can step in, or a family member or whatever it is, and you're able to go back to work and focus on your career and give it all that it needs in order to get those regular pay reviews and pay increases. Or you're running your own business and you're able to put the attention into your business that you can develop it, grow it, and grow the staff, whatever your circumstances. Maybe that happens. But I think that that woman is such an outlier that she does not represent the normal experience of the average woman moving through either a job or moving through business. So now you've got your child, you've taken your maternity leave, whatever else, you've returned to business or you've returned to employment, you're on roughly the same wages, there's an opportunity that comes up to grow the business or take a promotion, but you can't do that because you've got to take care of the children, or someone has to take care of the children. And even if you get in childminders, there's only a certain amount of time that they're going to work. Maybe if you're really lucky in your area, you can drop the children off 7:30, 8 o'clock, but you invariably have to pick them up again by 6, latest 6:30. Senior positions these days demand more of us. And even if you're in the circumstances where you're working from home, so I speak to clients all the time that are working from home, that have young children, and they might take 15 minutes out to dash out and get the children, have the food prepared in advance, or maybe the childminder feeds the foods, and then they sit the children down, you know, somewhere from 5 to 5:30 to watch TV for half an hour, if your children are old enough that they can be left so they can go back and finish off the work. And then they're back on their phones in the evening again, still trying to work. It is a very challenging employment place and business owner position to be in a position where your time must be focused on either your job or your business rather than your family. It's very challenging. So that's one thing, okay? And I'm going to explain some scenarios, some that will be relevant and some that would have been lovely if only we'd had a looking glass in just a minute. Let me give you one more reason why a woman's financial current income, future wealth, future financial security is going to be affected in a different way to a man or a male partner. And that is through divorce or separation. Typically, again, at divorce or separation, it is the female, the mother, that takes the children and the care of the children. If you have a good breakup, whatever that means, and that you're talking and everything goes well, then your partner may pay towards that. And that would be wonderful if you shared the financial cost implication equally, so that you only paid for half the childcare in some ways the way you might have when you were working. However, if you were working and your partner was earning more, it might be that your partner paid 75% of the childcare and you used childcare vouchers, or you paid 25% or whatever else it is. And so it may have been imbalanced in your relationship, but now that you're separated, it's balanced, and therefore there's another cost consideration there. But once you've separated, you're now in a position where the sole responsibility of the children is yours. There's no one else to go pick them up from school or drop them at school, or pick them up or drop them at the childminders. It has to be you. There's no one else that can come home from work and step in and take their turn at reading the children their bedtime story and putting them to bed while you finish off, or reverse, where you do the evenings and they maybe do the mornings before they get out. You've got no team anymore. There is just you doing this yet again. And going forward, this is going to cap your earning potential, whether you're running your own business, whether you have employees, or whether you are an employee. And so it is different, my argument, as a woman, that your financial future, and therefore your financial security, will always be affected from the minute that you decide to have children and fall pregnant. Whether you stay together with your partner forever and ever, which would be perfect, you're still going to be affected. If your relationship breaks up, you're double affected. And then that doesn't take into account the normal things that happen to people regardless of their gender, which is things like redundancy, or, losing your job in some way. That can affect anybody. If that happens on top, you're in an even greater difficult position. So if you had a magic wand, what could you do? One of the things you could do is, before you start having children, when you're earning at what will effectively be your highest rate, pre-children will be the highest rate for your skills and knowledge that you will ever achieve. You will achieve 100% of what you are worth before you have children. It's unlikely, or less likely, that you will receive 100% of what you're worth, truly worth, once you've had the children, because you won't be able to give it 100% of your attention. And even if you do, your employer will never believe you. So at that point where you're earning 100% of your potential, and so is your partner, and yes, because you're young, what you're actually doing is spending your money, enjoying yourselves, and that's absolutely good and right that you do, and why don't you? Particularly if you're then going to be moving through a period of about 20 years where your focus is on family and not wild adventures and traveling the world. Okay, but what if you had put some of that money into property? And let's just keep the numbers simple again and say that your earning potential when you have a child moving forward is reduced by 500 units, pounds, dollars, whatever it is, 500 a month, we're going to call it. What if you could have invested in property so that you bought 1 or 2 properties that generated 500 units a month? You could have invested some of the fund money that you had into a property portfolio of, just at this point, let's just say those 2 properties, and those 2 properties gave you the money that replaced the income that you would lose while having the children. And then coming out the other side, when you eventually manage to push them out the door, turn the key and not let them back in again, that extra 500 is yours. But of course, along the way, you might have been able to add to those properties using various other techniques to build your financial security strategy. And we'll talk about that in more detail next week and the week after. So we can't go back. We can't wind back the clock and go, okay, so 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago, before I had my children, right, let's invest in property. It doesn't work that way. So what can you do about it now? What you can do about it now is start investing now. And the reason for starting investing now is because of all the future things that might happen, that you can put in place a replacement income or a surplus income or a surplus pot that can prepare for all of those eventualities that may or may not happen to you. So let's just start looking at those, and we'll look at those chronologically. So you may have parents right now that are working or are just coming up to retirement. What if in a few years from now, your parents need a bit more support? One or other of them gets ill, maybe they both get ill, maybe they get frail, maybe they're perfectly fine and they don't. And that's great. You'll get to save your money if that doesn't happen. But wouldn't it be nice if you could have invested in some properties so that, let's say you still have this 500 units spare and you don't need them at the moment, that you could put £100 a month towards having a cleaner for an hour a week to help tidy your parents' house for them, or work in the garden for them, or do odd jobs for them, or anything, stop mum or dad climbing the step ladder, or any of the sort of things that you really don't want them to be doing because they're not safe or because they're exhausting for them. Or maybe you could pay for them to go away or top up their money so that they could go away with some friends and get some winter sun, something to sort of cheer them up. There's so many things that you could do if you had spare money because you'd invested, and if you don't need that money, you could choose to spend some of that on your parents. Now, what if your parents don't need it and your children don't need it at the moment? Great. Now you've got extra money that you can use for family holidays. It could be that you just keep that money in the account in your property portfolio and you recycle it and reinvest and grow your portfolio from maybe 2 properties to 4 properties. And then what happens if, whether you've grown your portfolio or not, and your parents don't need help, now your children need help, then you'd have the money there. And so I remember having a conversation with one of my clients, and they said that they had a couple £100,000, and what they wanted to do was give 100,000 each to their children to buy a house. This is a very classic parent thinking, and I talked about that in my book, Property for the Next Generation, where as parents, we want to provide for our children. It's not necessarily what's right for your children or what they need. What your children need is to be happy and to be healthy and to be in a position where they can make a career choice that supports their mental health in terms of exercising their skills, helping them to grow, giving them status, but also giving them joy and preferably limited stress. And one way to do that, and one of my clients is very focused on this at the moment, is putting them in a position where they don't have to work just to pay the bills. Now, there's a fine balance here in that you don't want to get so far down the line that they never have to work, and then maybe they don't, and maybe their mental health and everything else is affected because they've fallen completely out of the societal norms. But what if they didn't have that pressure, and then they could choose to have a job that gave them joy? Maybe they'd work in the charitable sectors. Maybe they do something for the environment or for the fellow man or for the community where they did earn a wage, but they got not just income as a reward, they got joy, happiness, contact, a sense of purpose, status, all of those other intangible rewards that are so important. And actually, if you look at what young people want, they do seem to be sort of splitting into those that are still attracted to sort of more material things, like they want cars and houses and jobs and status and going out with friends. And then there are others that are very focused on the community, giving back, sense of purpose, creating something. And if you've got one of those children, then being in a position where you can support them, that would be brilliant. And you can do that through a property portfolio. So I said to my client, instead of giving them 100,000 each, where they buy a house now with all the costs that are incurred, then they've got to keep a mortgage going because that's not going to be enough money to buy them a property in the area that they want to live. So now they're in a position where they have to work and they have to pay the mortgage, and that's right and good. That's sort of a passive or a rite of passage, if you like. But then what happens if that's not where they want to live and that's not the job, and then they want to change jobs, but they can't change jobs because of the financial burden of the mortgage, which then would fall to you to step in, etc., etc. And so instead of spiraling them up and giving them a leg up on the property ladder, what actually happens is it becomes a financial burden for you. What if you took that money and invested it in property so that it generated an income? And if you didn't need that income, then what happens is that your children could then test out the areas, test out the job market, test out their first few goes at adult life until they get to the point where they're settled and that they know then that they've got a partner and they want to create a family, and therefore they want to buy and own a house, because at that point they're going to stay still. And here's the difference. You don't buy a house unless you're going to stay in that place, because the constant buying and selling, unless you're trading in a very particular way, which is a whole technique about buy, remortgage, buy another one, but don't sell the one that you've got, and so on, and make a property portfolio out of it that way round. If you're just doing what ordinary home buyers do, which is buy a house, then sell a house, then buy another house, then stay in that for a while and then sell that and so on, there are overheads with the buying and the selling process. And those overheads then eat into the capital. And it's not, from a mathematical point of view, the best use of your money and property. If you only invest in a property that becomes a home that you know that you're going to stay in for the next 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years, because you're going to put your children through school, that's a completely different kettle of fish. In the meantime, you put your spare money into a property portfolio that is bought specifically so that it creates a return on your money. And that return could then be used to subsidize the rent of your children living in a place that they want to try out. Is this where I want to live? Is this the career that I want to have? And help them get established that way. And then when they're ready, you've got a number of properties sitting in a portfolio that either will have saved up enough money for a deposit for them, or maybe you're in a position where one or two of them could be remortgaged and equity released. There's all sorts of options that can then be open to you. And what I worked out for these clients, given the age of their children and the pot that they had, is instead of going straight ahead and buying 2 residential properties for their children who weren't quite ready for it, were literally just coming up to 18, which is quite early to be buying straight into a property, they were in a position where they could actually invest that property, buy a portfolio, create a fairly significant portfolio that gave them the cash now, that then gave them the cash to support their children to do whatever they wanted. And if we then extrapolated forward and said that it was another 6 to 8 years before the children were ready to settle down, we could actually then look at what the properties had done in terms of creating rental profit and guess, because obviously it was always a guess, as to what they might have increased in value, and being very conservative about that. And then look at how you're then in a position in, say, 5 years to buy one child a property and 5 years more to buy another child a property, but still have a portfolio that is generating income for you at the other end of it. But instead of waiting 10 years until you buy a property portfolio for yourself, you've bought it 10 years cheaper. What if you could buy a property 10 years cheaper than the property prices are now? Wouldn't you wish that you did that? And so you can turn things around the other way. And let me take this back to you as a woman, or as to someone who knows a woman, to wives, to mothers, to sisters, to daughters. What if you had a property portfolio that then was bought now and provided for you in the future for whatever circumstances came about? And let's say what we're doing here is we are hoping that your relationship lasts. So why not create a limited company in which both husband and wife are the directors? You put in the property portfolio. While you're together and everything is fine, then this income is just family income, and that's wonderful. But if you get to the point where your relationship doesn't last, remember that you are directors. Let the husband and wife separate and let the directors work together so that that portfolio keeps on generating income for you both. It could be, and here I'm going to speak to the men, where that half of the portfolio that is yours actually provides enough income that it pays the charges or the money that you would pay to support your family in terms of some sort of income support, family support money. what if when you pass and part, the husband is then still in a position where he's got sufficient income that he can create his new life, but the family is supported by this portfolio going forward? It's just a thought. And it sounded like I ended on divorce and all of that sort of stuff, but it's not. It's about being clear about why property investment could be really important for you and for your family and for your future and for your financial security, by thinking about the risks. Because if you don't think about the risks and prepare for the risks, then the risks will come back and bite you. And I just have noticed how in the last, let me think, where are we? 15 to 18 months, that the majority of my clients have switched over to being women. I do still have male clients, but it's unusual that I've gone completely the other way. I'm probably 75, 80% female clients at the moment, with only, say, 20 odd % male clients, which normally it's the other way around. And every one of these women is now focused on creating their financial futures and their financial security for themselves, for their families. But they're all in a position where they're doing it a good 15 years later than maybe if they'd had that magic glass, they would have done. Now, if you are in your 30s, 40s, I'm not saying don't have fun. I'm just saying, if you looked at your budget, and you know how I love a spreadsheet, is there a way that you could put in place a plan now that meant you could still have some fun, but you could also buy a property by the end of this year because you'd pull together your savings while you're both earning, while you're both young enough? If you've already got children and therefore you're feeling the pinch of the childcare costs, not just feeding and clothing them, but there's car seats and buggies, and then as they get older, there's activities. These children are always going to want to have activities and childminders and everything else. This is the point where the family as a whole comes together. And it'll get more complicated if you've got siblings. But if you are a single child, and let's talk about the simplest option first, now's the time to have a conversation with your parents, and you'll probably have both sets of parents, and look at what you can do as a family for the benefit of the family. Remember that by investing in as a family, you can create a pot that would then go up and help the parents when they need them, and go down and help the grandchildren when they need them, and support you in the middle when you need it. What we did was we spoke to my parents. I'm just going to pause for a minute. Sorry, the screen switched off then. So what we did with my parents is we had a conversation with them about releasing equity. As normal happens, around the 60 to 70 mark, my parents cleared their mortgage. In fact, I think they'd probably done it a bit earlier. And I went back to them and I said, look, I've got this idea to invest in property. Can we release some of the equity from your house? I'll pay the mortgage. It won't cost you anything. But I want to leverage that money that is sitting in your house and doing nothing. I can invest that. And then this is around 2008. So we were looking at 10 or 12% returns, which was more than double that we could get in the bank. At the moment, we've got an economy generally, or a global economy generally, that is talking about rising inflation. And so inflation's high and therefore interest rates are high. You might not get that return at the moment, but it'll swing back the other way. It always does. It is just a wave, and it'll come back round. So don't worry about that. But at the time, we were in a position where we could earn 10 to 12% on that money by investing in property. I released that money. I paid the mortgage, and then I used that money to buy houses. And I will talk to you about that as one of the case studies in a few weeks' time. So releasing equity as a specific strategy. Okay. So in the meantime, what we did was created a family portfolio so that when parents needed support, there was money there. When the grandchildren, which are my children, effectively need support, the money was there. Yes, it was made a little bit more complicated because there was me and my sister, but we had the conversation together and we were both in agreement. Now, what you can do is you can take financial advice, and if one sibling doesn't want the money and the other sibling does, or one wants to invest in property and the other doesn't, that's perfectly fine. And what you can look at is how you can take, if you like, an early inheritance, and that it can be adjusted in the wills. But you'll need financial advice for that, and I'm not giving you that, but there is a way that you can do this. Now imagine that instead of waiting till sometime in the future where you may or may not receive an inheritance, you got a living inheritance now. And with that money now, while houses are effectively 10, 20, 30 years cheaper than they will be in the future, you were able to take that money invested in property, and investing it in property create that return. And with that return, support your parents, yourself, your children, all because you leveraged, and this is the art of leverage, you leveraged the value that was in the house that belongs to your parents with their blessing and with your siblings' blessing and cooperation. You can then look at how you can create a number of these properties. So maybe what you do is you create 2 property companies, one for you and one for your sibling. And maybe you are co-directors of those, maybe you're not. Maybe your sibling and their partner is directors on one business. Maybe your partner is director on another business. Maybe your partner then does the same thing and draws money out of their parents' house and brings that down into a company where he and you are directors, or he's director of his money and you're director of your company. And maybe you pull that all together into an investing pot, into a limited company that you then move forward. There are so many ways that you can look at doing this, but the bottom line here, and I hope that I've given you ideas about what you could do. I hope I've brought your attention to the risks that are down the line. But above all, if you're a woman, I hope that I've given you a wake-up call against the risks that may be in your future, the fact of life that your income is going to be forever limited, but you could do something about it. You could use the resources that are within your grasp to actually change your financial future and secure your financial future by looking at how you as a family group invested in property, or how you as an individual invested in property. If you want to discuss this at any time, I would happily have that conversation with you. I love brainstorming with clients about how they can just think differently about the money. And at the end of that conversation, you may go, that was a great idea, Vicky. It's not for me. That's perfectly fine. You might go, that was a great idea. I'm off. I'm doing it. That is also a great idea. Or it could be that you want my help, either to help you actually invest in property by doing it for you, or to teach you how to do it yourself by doing it with you. I am here to help. All you need to do is book a call. So if you are a female listener, if you are a woman who up until today hasn't really thought about your financial limits and your financial security moving into the future and the implication for you and your children, regardless of how long your relationship may last, and I hope that it is a long and happy one, maybe now's the time to have a think. Maybe now's the time to make sure that you subscribe to this podcast so that you don't mix the next few episodes. And what I'm going to be talking about next week is the difference in language here is between strategy and technique, and why they are so important. And then I'm going to run through the different sort of techniques that you could use to leverage money through property, why some are better, why some are more high risk. That's not English. It's not that they're riskier, but they are of a higher risk threshold than others. And I'll have case studies for you. And then I'm going to keep going through as we go over the next few weeks and really dig into, if you like, all the whys of property, maybe some of the hows and the whats of property as well. But the next 8 weeks or so are going to be solidly showing you why property is a great idea and why this is something that you need to get into. And it doesn't matter what they're saying in terms of the press. It doesn't really matter whether inflation is, because wherever inflation goes, there's always a knock on. There's never just losers in any economic sense. And the thing about property is that when you understand your strategy, there is always a technique that you can be using to maximize the economy and the economic environment that we're in at the time. And that's what we're going to cover off over the next few weeks. So I hope you continue listening. Please do make sure that you subscribe. If you're enjoying these podcasts, please do leave a review. I would be most grateful for those. It lets me know how you're doing. And above all, if this has triggered some thoughts or triggered some questions, or you disagree or you agree, whatever, why not get in touch? So you can drop me an email, or you can book a call, and you just go along to the website, which is vickywushay.com, and you'll be able to find all the links there, either to get in touch or to email me or to book a call, whatever you want. So we're coming to the end. My name is Vicky Wushay, and you've been listening to A Wealthy Life. And I hope that what I've been able to do in this podcast is really inspire you, alert you to the risks, and above all, of course, put some whoosh into your life. Thank you very much for listening, and make sure you listen next week.